So my name is Anna Vakali and I will present today a paper titled Conflict, Rivalry and Violence Between Musicians in Late Ottoman Istanbul, a View from the Ottoman Archives. This paper is a very preliminary presentation of findings of archival research I conducted in the framework of the InterMusiG program. The research was conducted here in Istanbul at the Ottoman Archives in Istanbul, known as Başbakanlık Arşivleri, as well as the Ottoman Kadi courts, the Islamic court archives at the ISAM Library in Istanbul. Both researches were conducted online during the time of the pandemic, and they focused on the main topic subjects of the InterMusiG program: music and entertainment in the wider sense, and musicians of different social strata, different ethno-religious backgrounds, and the way they interacted with each other in 19th century Ottoman Istanbul. Before presenting some selected cases from the archives, some of the most interesting cases, I would like to begin with two considerations pertaining to the theoretical framework of this research. One consideration has to do with what historians have repeatedly noted pertaining to the study of Ottoman intercommunal relationships, telling that actually the study has suffered from a conceptual deadlock ranging from antagonism to amity. What I mean with that is that research has often been squeezed between two different views or poles, we can say, the one of peaceful coexistence and the other of boundaries that cannot be demolished in a way. So the one of this perspective speaks of this peaceful coexistence, which often is also invested with some nostalgia by historians or other researchers. And this coexistence is manifest in good neighborhood relationships, in attending each other's weddings, baptisms, other religious festivals, paying visits to each other, or, for example, visiting the common coffee houses, going out, spending their leisure time in the same places. So the one pole being this peaceful coexistence, the other pole is the one which underlines the existence of boundaries, the robustness of these boundaries in everyday life, as they may be manifest in many areas, including naming, the names that were being used, kinship terminology, marital endogamy, diet that was being followed, dressing, education, educational institutions, and perhaps in some cases also preferred methods of gaining a livelihood, making ends meet in a sense. So why this has been, literature has been informed in the past by these two different poles, today there exists the effort to overcome such dichotomies and to elaborate more on the boundaries being as well inclusive and exclusive boundaries. They are often being considered to be blurred but not totally dissolved. Historians have looked also at the performative aspect of everyday coexistence, as well as the meaning attributed by actors themselves on the intercommunal relations. So how were quotidian actors of Ottoman societies viewing the interactions with other members here in this paper in the field of entertainment? So a last note here comes from David Rimberg, who I would like to quote. He has an interesting thought on the issue of violence among communities. He argues that while violence, hostility, and competitions are seen only as a destructive breakdown of social relations, they actually can exist a constructive relationship between conflict and coexistence, and violence and aggression are also forms of association between different individuals or communities. So overall, the current effort of historians is to think beyond the considerations of whether communities interacted or not, whether this interaction was peaceful or not, and elaborate more on other levels like the social stratification of such interaction, the ways it affected people's lives, as well as the ways it fitted into the wider socio-economic context. Secondly, another issue raised by historians is the importance of distinguishing between everyday coexistence and a top-down perspective which focuses on legal, political, and discoursive forms of coexistence, implying peaceful living together of millets or ethnic groups in the form of the Ottoman society. So everyday coexistence has received less attention in literature. It's more slippery field of inquiry to really find archives which show how people coexisted in the everyday life is quite difficult, and those historians have given their attention more to toleration, to the study of practices that granted considerable freedoms to Christians and Jews in the Ottoman society, while Usama Makdisi has noted that everyday coexistence is much more difficult to trace in the archives than these practices of toleration I just mentioned. Similarly, the historian Nicholas Doumanis has called intercommunality a blank page in the archives. It militates against the possibility of events being the grist of conventional history, why it's very difficult to pin down events in the classical sense when we search for everyday coexistence. So with these two considerations in mind, the one about the conceptual deadlock between peaceful and violent coexistence, and the other the need to find also material about everyday coexistence between individuals or between communities, I conducted my archival research in the Ottoman archives to see how everyday coexistence evolved, especially in the sector of music, entertainment, a part of life that actually has rarely been seen through the lenses of intercommunal relations. Some of the questions which guided my research were the following. For example, were in the first place everyday musicians and people coming from different social strata, coming from different ethno-religious groups, were they interacting with each other? What kind of interactions do we find? Given that entertainment is supposed to be a pleasant activity, was this interaction only one of pleasure? Was there also conflicts and violence entailed? How did this interaction cooperated or was combined with other areas of the life? And what are the similarities and difference between cooperation or between interaction on the individual and on the communal level? Finally, I was interested also in the state, in the Ottoman state. Given that the 19th century was a time of increased modernization, we have a lot of reforms now stipulating the equality between Ottoman subjects. I was interested in how the state, to what extent, following this new Tanzimat reforms, permitted a bigger mixing of people for the sake of entertainment, and whether it had any anxieties pertaining to this mixing of people from different backgrounds for the sake of entertainment. So I will now proceed to some examples from the Ottoman archives illuminating the questions I just posed. I want to make a small note beforehand about the nature of the archives. So we know that interaction between everyday people is recorded in the archives, in the state archives, only when it has to be. That is when there is a transaction among people. They sell something to each other, they rent something to each other, they lend money from each other, or when this interaction is problematic, actually when there is a conflict that has to be solved. So giving the nature of this archives, it's mainly court archives that we can pin down interaction of people, of subjects of the Ottoman society. And pertaining to the nature of this court archives, we have a differentiation following the Tanzimat reforms. Up until the Tanzimat reforms, we have mainly the Ottoman kadi courts, the Islamic courts, the classical Islamic courts, while after the Tanzimat reform, starting in 1839, we have the state establishing new secular courts, part of the Ottomans' modernizing reforms, and they were gradually taking over the adjudication of cases from the kadi courts, but this happened gradually over the decades of the 19th century. So The secular courts start with the penal cases, and later in the 60s and the 70s they slowly take over also civil cases from the kadi courts. These new courts were judging according to new penal codes. We have 3 penal codes from the 40s and the 50s. And another interesting fact is that the archives, the nature of the archives coming from the secular courts is more rich, we can say, for historians. They are bigger and they are different in length and in the nature. I will explain this also later. So they give us a lot of more interpretative possibilities for the cases that are presented. So they are longer and they are also different, as we will see. So everyday musicians and dancers, actors from the entertainment sector interacting with members from other communities appear in the Sicil records or in the Tanzimat, police or court records in a variety of cases. So we have financial transactions, we have people from different backgrounds giving money to each other, renting money to each other, renting out places like meyhanes, like coffee houses. We have more violent cases like people again from the entertainment injuring or killing each other, stealing each other for causes we will see in the rest of this paper. So renting a place of entertainment to each other was an action that included in Istanbul Christians, Armenians or Muslims, women as well as men, and all of them appear as both owners or tenants in the wider entertainment business, with no clear pattern of one group, for example, being the ones who rented or the ones who were the owners. There is no such discernible pattern, at least in the archives. To provide one example, in 1827 we find in the court archives an Armenian woman called Horasima, the daughter of Ohan. She was represented in the court by Artin, the son of Serope, in the Istanbul Kadi court. She was the owner of a coffee house in Beyoğlu, and she was renting it out to the Muslim woman called Nefise, the daughter of Musa. So Horasima goes to the court, Artin goes to the court representing Horasima, and in the presence of 2 Muslim witnesses, they ask for the termination of the contract, as the mother of Horasima, of the Armenian woman, needed the coffee house for her own usage, for her own needs. Nevertheless, the court ruled that Nefise was a poor woman, she had no other income, and her brother was the holder of the place's gedik, of the place's privilege. So the court decided to permit Nefise to keep the place, so to continue renting the place from the coffee house from the Armenian Horasima until the end of her life. In 86 we have the son of Hamami el-Hajj Beshe el-Hajj Osman appealing to the Galata Kadi court, where he was represented by Abdulhamid A and 2 Muslim witnesses, stating that the non-Muslim Haji Yani, the son of Yorgo, owed him the rent of some months from the barber shop and coffee house he was renting for him in Karaköy, and which belonged to the Vakıf, the religious endowments of the Hagia Sophia Mosque. So Osman, the son of Hamami el-Hajj Beshe el-Hajj, appears in the Galata court through a representative and asks the rents of many months owed to him by the non-Muslim Haji Yani, the son of Yorgi. In the same year, 1806, the non-Muslim merchant Yorgi, the son of Prashkova, who had been renting a coffee house to the Muslim Bekçi Ali Beshe, was confronted with the Muslim Beshe's wife at the Galata Kadi court. The wife, following the death of her husband, claimed that she should be able to continue renting the place even after his death. As Yorgi had been initially renting himself the coffee house from the Hagia Sophia Vakfı, representatives of the religious endowments administrators were also present in the trial. Nevertheless, the court ruled against the wife of Ali Beshe. Apart from renting a place, owing money to each other was also an often phenomenon. In 1806, the music player Çalgıcı Tanash, the son of Prashkova from Izmir, appealed to the Galata Kadi court because the Armenian dancer Arsen, the son of Bedros, was owing him 540 kurush. Vasilis, the son of Luca, both a Serbetçi, a futures maker, and a master dancer, and Ustarakas appeared 3 times at the Galata court in the years 1806 and 7, stating that a non-Muslim dancer was owing him 2,600 kurush. The interesting part of this case is that the non-Muslim debtor appeared with several names, including Agop, the son of Kirkor, Georgi, the son of Kirkor, as well as Georgi Namidier Nosine Agop, the son of Kirkor. So this case speaks not only for the simultaneous holding of different professions by people from the entertainment sector. Vasilis, for example, was both a fruit juice seller and a dancer, but also for the puzzling existence of one and the same person, which appeared with different names and even different ethno-religious belongings in the same court cases. So overall, what these cases from the kadi courts in the pre-Tanzimat times show us is that economic exchange was not only dense, but also cut through different social classes, genders, and religious affiliations. After the onset of the Tanzimat, we find such financial exchanges also in the archives of the Meclisi Vala, the Supreme Council of Judicial Ordinances, founded in 1838 as part of the Tanzimat reforms, or also in the archives of different ministries. So in 1856, it's being reported that the young dancer Nicholas, who was of a very young age and had been enrolled to the group of dancers, the Koltakemi, was owing money to his master Usta Yogi, around 3,400 kurush. He had spent the money for clothes and other expenses. In the meantime, there appeared a man named Jovan, and a citizen of the state of Sardinia, who stated that he was the father of Nicholas and asked for his son's expulsion from the profession of dancer. But as the master Usta Yogi was still asking for his money to be paid back, the case was being sent to the foreign ministry, probably because of the claimed citizenship of the dancer's father. In October 1866, it's being reported by the Supreme Court that the Meyhane owner Yanko Vasili was owing money to the Greek citizen Yanni Zachariadi, which he paid back by selling his Gidik privilege of a sherbet hane, a fruit juice shop he was owning in Samatia. In April 1855, it was reported by the Supreme Court to the Ministry of Finances that the case of the woman Mariotka, who had sold a meyhane to the European merchant Yanko Vitali, and where there had been disagreements between the two parties about the issue, should be referred to the Council of Financial Accounting, the Meclisi Muhasebei Maliye. Similar to the pre-Tanzimat era, these cases reveal that debt and selling transactions between people like dancers and meyhane owners, which were not exclusively but also handled now more and more by the Supreme Court, cut across various ethno-religious groups, professions, and genders with no concrete pattern. Entertainment thus was a sector in which people from various backgrounds participated financially, made a living off, formed networks, sold and bought properties, or lent money, while this sometimes was only one of the many professions they were following in life. In the following part of the paper, I will focus on conflict and crimes between everyday musicians. Conflict and violence were not excluded from the sector of music and entertainment. In addition, conflict was not an intercommunal prerogative. Many cases in the archives speak for intracommunal conflict, especially disputes between members of the same millet concerning moral aspects of opening meyhanes and coffee houses in the neighborhoods. In 1833, non-Muslims from the Heybeli Island, which belongs to the Prince Islands in the Marmara Sea, would appeal to the Kadi court against Dimitri, the son of Michal, who tried to open a coffee house near a cemetery on the island. As I quote, they argued that this would be against their order, their nizam. In 1855, after the onset of the Tanzimat, the non-Muslims, the Ahali Reaya of the Mirahor Mahallesi in Samatia in Istanbul, applied collectively to the Supreme Court against the cloth trader Yorgi, who had opened a meyhane, a koltuk meyhanesi, next to a church in Mirahor Mahallesi. Their argument was that Yorgi's meyhane's presence was harming the women and the children passing from that spot on the way to the neighborhood's church and school. In their petition, the non-Muslims made reference to the protection by the Ottoman state of their, I quote, life, property and honor, clinging thus to the Tanzimat discourse. Concerning intercommunal violence, its victims would similarly appeal to the kadi courts before the Tanzimat. In 1807, the Armenian kundakçı, gunstock maker Mirdic, appealed to the Galata kadi court, stating that the dancer Vasili, the son of Vasili from Bursa, had beaten him without a reason and broken thereby his leg while they were at the Sherbethane, the fruit juice house of Moralis and Galata. He accepted 10 kurush as a compensation. After the establishment of the Tanzimat, such cases would be solved in the newly founded secular courts, in the Tanzimat courts. As I mentioned before, these courts, part of a modernizing state, were holding detailed archives, including the interrogation protocols of the persecuted persons, called the istintakname. A most telling case is the one of the Armenian Serope, who was working as the meyhane palikaryası, something like a superintendent or a steward, and who was killed by the Christian dancer Costa, the son of Yorgi. The fact that both were originally from Izmir provides maybe evidence of how migration patterns were combined with professional ones, as well as the networks built in the place of migration. And the destination. In August 1848, the Meclisi Vala reported on the murder of the Armenian Serope, called from among the meyhane palikaryalarından or meyhane hizmetçilerinden, so somebody working in the meyhane but currently being unemployed, the killing of this Armenian by the Greek Orthodox Kosti, the son of Yorgi. Kosti had been a dancer at the Çizmeli meyhane in Galata. At the night of the murder, Kosti had been drinking alcohol with some Greek friends at a barber shop near Galata, owned by the Armenian Artin, and Serope had also been there. After drinking in various places, Kostis with his friend and with Serope, Kosti stabbed with a knife the Armenian Serope while they were walking on the street in the middle of the night, and then dispersed, run away with his friends in various directions. The injured Serope was brought to the police station. He recognized Kosti, who had been arrested in the meantime as the perpetrator of his injury, but Serope died some hours later at the Armenian hospital in Yedikule. In his interrogation, Kosti denied having stabbed Serope. He admitted that he had some feelings of hatred against him, and the reason for these feelings are quite interesting. According to Kosti, Serope had been the one who pushed him forward while he was hiding in a shop when the imperial guards were out in the streets looking for dances for the imperial winter barracks. Despite this hatred, Kosti stated that he had not been the one who had killed Serope, but, I quote, a man with European clothes had done so. While Kosti was found guilty based on the testimonies of his friends and was imprisoned, and the trial was then also referred to the Kadi court for the satisfaction of the rights of the deceased relatives according to Islamic law, this history, the single history, opens a whole range of questions about intercommunality and quotidian musicians. So even if Serope used the story to legitimize in front of the court that he indeed had some hatred against Kosti, the story is telling. So how come imperial guards were roaming the streets of Istanbul looking for dancers for the palace? Why was Kosti avoiding being recruited as such a dancer in the palace and was hiding while the recruitment was taking place, and instead preferred to work in a meyhane? What would be his profession as a dancer in the meyhane? What did this dancer did at the meyhane? What would he do as a dancer at the palace? So, and which dancers were accepted in the palace, from which ethno-religious backgrounds, or was there any distinction or not? Most importantly, how comes Serope, who was probably a friend, with whom he was going out in the nights and drinking, pushed Kosti forward while he was hiding in order not to be recruited to the palace? What kind of antagonisms could explain this behavior or betrayal? Kosti's testimony is interesting also from another point of view. He described the murderer of Serope as somebody, the murderer of Serope as somebody dressed in European clothes, Frankierfetleri. It could either be the intention of Serope to put the blame on somebody else, which he then described in very general terms, or the statement provides evidence for his negative feelings, for Kostis' negative feelings towards such foreigners residing in the city, adding thus another level to the intercommunal aspect of the story. Actually, trials like the one of Kostis usually, as I said, entail also the interrogation protocol, which gives us a lot of information about the suspect, about the strategies he or she was following in the court. In this case, unfortunately, the interrogation protocol was not there, but such protocols have been used lately in some parts of Ottoman historiography, but they use such also for intercommunal, for understanding intercommunal relations. It's quite promising. So apart from these cases, I would like to finish by elaborating also on the role of the state in the intercommunal relations and intercommunal entertainment. The areas of intercommunality in which the state intervened the most and most often provide us actually a clue about the density or loosening of intercommunality. So while reforms had been introduced from the 1840s on, establishing the equality of Muslims and non-Muslims in all files and in front of the law, things were more complex when we came to the field of entertainment. There are two areas which, according to the archives, the state was alarmed the most. The one was the increasing visits of Muslims to meyhanes, to drink alcohol, to consume alcohol. The other was the increasing appearance of entertainment activities among non-Muslims, which bear a nationalist character. So we are going to see cases from these two different areas in which the state tried to intervene. The state tried to control intercommunal entertainment by continuously issuing prohibitions for alcohol to be sold near mosques and cemeteries. In 1828, a decision of the Istanbul Kadi court stated that while alcohol consumption was allowed only for non-Muslims, the state had not paid the necessary attention to the issues. Meyhanes had been flourishing, while Muslims, particularly some sinners among them, Feseka Güruhu, had increasingly been visiting these places too. On the other hand, only a particular number of meyhanes had permission to operate, and most of them were doing so without a license, according to this document. Although non-Muslims had been warned to just visit meyhanes in order to take their drink and go, and not spend more time in them for having fun, and Muslims had been warned to not visit these places at all, both groups, according to this document, had been transgressing these warnings. Consequently, Muslims who would visit the meyhanes should be punished, while non-Muslims should be warned not to spend much time in the meyhanes. Similar decisions continued throughout the Tanzimat, as numerous irades, sultanic decrees, can be found in the archives ordering the closing of shops selling alcohol near mosques and cemeteries during the 19th century. Next to alcohol, especially from the 1860s on, the state was alarmed for gatherings and performances on the part of non-Muslims bearing a nationalist character. In July 1861, a police officer of the district of Beyoğlu reported that an English citizen named Kaptan Mikel had been staging in his casino a theatre play named Leonidi, which was representing how the Greeks took Mora, Peloponnese, during the Greek Revolution of 1821. As the document states, this was an issue touching upon politics, politica dokunacağından, the play was forbidden. Mikel, on the other hand, quickly changed the contract of his place to the name of another English citizen, probably out of fear that his casino may be closed by the authorities. In 1860, it was reported that a certain Haralambos had organized a sedition, a fesat, in his casino in Kumkapi. In 1875, it was reported that a dangerous Greek book entitled Collection of Songs was confiscated at the borders in order to be burned, as it was stated that such books should not enter the Ottoman state. To conclude, cases from the Ottoman archives, like the ones I selectively presented, enable us to elaborate on those gray zones of intercommunal activities which go beyond the notions of just friendship or isolation and compartmentalization. They are moments of contacts between dancers, music players, meyhane and coffee shop owners of the lower and middle classes from different ethno-religious groups of Ottoman Istanbul, that is Muslims, Christians, Armenians, who in the middle of ongoing reforms participate in the business of entertainment in manifold ways, do business together with no at least obvious restrictions, spend time drinking together, but also use violence in cases of professional antagonisms. In any case, all this information speaks for dense communication within the urban structure of Ottoman Istanbul at the lower level. But, not to forget, all this took place in a time of the gradually spreading of nationalist ideas, reflected also in the sector of entertainment, and which for sure must have its own impact on daily intercommunality more and more towards the 20th century. Thank you very much for listening.